cancer of an arm.
Brady on third down to the end zone. Gronkowski, his second touchdown today.
What a catch by Conner, and James Conner is in. What a play.
Got to the end zone, and he's caught. Touchdown.
Minshew taking a deep shot for Goddard. He's open. He's got it, and he's got a touchdown. 36-yard score, and Minshew all fired up.
It is a big lead, and this is Travis Homer, who got a block, takes it the other way, and this will be 6. Can you believe it? 73 yards.
Welcome in, everyone, to the Lucky Shots podcast. It is week 14, and it is the fantasy show. We are 1 week away. 1 week from your fantasy playoffs. For me, that means I'm in one league, out of another. My main league, the league that I run, I got my 4th win this week, so that's great, but not going to make the playoffs there. Still fighting for the first seed in another league, so all I need this week is a win, and I got to outscore the guy in first place by 50, so we'll see what happens there. But either way, I get a first-round bye, so it's great. Hopefully, all of you are also in your fantasy playoffs and can make some sort of run. But let's take a look back last week at the top players, and we'll start with the Fantasy Kings. The quarterback position, Kyler Murray, up in the top again. This has got to be like his 3rd or 4th time as the Fantasy King quarterback. He had 30.82 fantasy points, only 123 passing yards, but 2 touchdowns through the air, 59 rushing yards, and 2 touchdowns on the ground. Javonte Williams was your running back fantasy king. He had 29.8 fantasy points, 102 yards on the ground, 6 catches, 76 yards, and a touchdown, and it's about damn time. I've been saying it all year. He is going to be, the feature back. Finally, you get Melvin Gordon out of there, and look what he does. He has a great game. He's going to be a great back for a long time to come. For your wide receiver fantasy king, it's Justin Jefferson. He racked up 35.6 fantasy points, had 14 targets, 11 catches, 182 yards, a touchdown, and tacked on 4 rushing yards to boot. Then you got your tight end fantasy king rounding out these top guys, George Kittle. He had 39.6 fantasy points, 12 targets, 9 catches, 181 yards, 2 touchdowns, and he tacked on 5 rushing yards as well. I believe he was the overall top fantasy scorer this week, and for a tight end, that's huge. They didn't have Debo, so they just went to the well of George Kittle, and if you had him, you probably won most of your fantasy weeks. So let's take a look now at the top quarterbacks. In the number 2 spot, you had Tom Brady with 28.62 fantasy points. He had 368 through the air, 4 touchdowns, and 1 interception. Right underneath him was Justin Herbert. He had 25.8 fantasy points, 317 through the air, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception, and 6 rushing yards. Back up in the top 5, Matt Stafford. He had 24 points even. He had 295 through the air, 3 touchdowns, and a couple rushing yards as well. And then probably one of the big shockers of the top 5 was Zach Wilson. Not the first time we've seen a Jets quarterback this season in the top 5, but it is the first time we see Zach Wilson up here. He had 21.04 fantasy points, 226 yards through the air, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception, and a rushing touchdown on top of that. Moving on to the top running backs. At the number 2 spot, we had David Montgomery. He had 28.1 fantasy points, 90 rushing yards, a touchdown, 8 catches for 51 yards. And I got to eat my words here because I put him down in the bust category last week. I didn't think he was going to have all that great of a game, but turns out he's the only thing on their offense that works. So he's in for a big game, it seems like, every week now. At the third spot, you had Jonathan Taylor, another top 5 performance. It's hard to now say a week he wasn't in the top 5 instead of name a week he was in the top 5. He had 24.3 fantasy points, 143 yards on the ground, and 2 touchdowns. Didn't add anything through the air, but he didn't need to. And then you had Josh Jacobs. He had 24 points, 52 rushing yards, a touchdown on the ground, added 9 catches for 38 yards. Finally, a piece of Josh Jacobs that we haven't seen in a while. And that makes him a very, very dangerous fantasy running back if he stays in the receiving back category. And then rounding out the top 5, the top guy from last week, Leonard Fournette. He had 22.2 fantasy points, 44 rushing yards, 7 receptions, 48 yards through the air, and a touchdown. Then we've got the wide receivers at the second spot. You had Deontay Johnson with 30.5 fantasy points. He had 11 targets, 8 catches, 105 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Underneath him, just barely, was Chris Godwin. He had 30.2 fantasy points, and he's got to have probably the most impressive stat line of the week. 17 targets, 15 receptions, 143 yards, and 9 rushing yards. If he had a touchdown or 2 this past week, he would have had somewhere in the neighborhood of a 60-point game. Then you had T. Higgins. I believe it's his second week up in the top 5 in a row. He had 28.8 fantasy points, 14 targets, 9 receptions, 138 yards, and a touchdown. And it's good to see. You saw a lot from him last year. You really hoped this year he would build on that. Jamar Chase kind of overshadowed him for a bit, but 14 targets is a healthy amount. And, if he can continue to get those kind of numbers, he's going to be a force to be reckoned with. And then rounding out your top 5 for your wide receivers was Cooper Kupp. He had 26.9 fantasy points on 10 targets, 8 catches, 129 yards, and a touchdown. Then you have your tight end position. No one got close to Kittle, but that's okay. Dallas Goddard, who was sitting on my bench in 2 separate leagues, scored 28.5 fantasy points, 6 targets, 6 catches, 105 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Then at the third spot, Rob Gronkowski, inching his way back up towards the top. He had 21.8 fantasy points, 8 targets, 4 receptions, 58 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Hawkinson back in the top 5 with 14.9 fantasy points. He had 8 targets, 4 catches, 49 yards, and a singular touchdown. And then Logan Thomas, before getting hurt again, had 13.8, and he rounds out the top tight ends. 5 targets, 3 catches, 48 yards, and a touchdown. So that's it for the look at last week. Now we're going to head into next week. It's a big week, the final regular season week. So what do you have to do to get in? Who are going to be the guys that help you move past your competition? Who's going to have a big week? Who's going to bust? And, let's see. Who's going to boom? Who's going to bust? And who are we sleeping on? So for your boomers, I think Patrick Mahomes, he's going to have a really big week. He's going up against Vegas, who is 15th against quarterbacks. In Week 10, these two teams have already played. And in Week 10, Mahomes had 36.24 fantasy points against the Raiders, where he threw for 406 yards, 5 touchdowns, and on average, Vegas gives up 21.57 fantasy points to the quarterback. I mean, you saw the huge performance the first time. The Raiders, didn't look all that great last week. They lost to Washington. So I don't see a bounce back in any way, and I don't see this game being any different for the Raiders. And I think Mahomes, he goes out and has another big week for you. So you can be very confident in playing him this week. One that's kind of tough to put here in the boomers, but it just looks good this week, is Justin Herbert. He's projected 21.2 fantasy points against the Giants, who are 8th against quarterbacks. He's had 3 straight weeks with 300 yards and multiple touchdowns, and he's got 5 games this season over 25 points. So that boom possibility, it's happening a third of the time, you could say. We're sitting at about 12 games. It's closer to 50%, but on the downside, the other 50% is just very not good. So which are you going to get? I think and I hope this week it's going to be a boom week because the Giants have given up 7 games this season of 20 points or more to quarterbacks. So, Herbert in this offense, they just put up 41 last week. He had a great game. Hopefully they can do that again this week against a weak Giants team, which will translate to points for Herbert, in my opinion. And then we move on to some running backs. The counterpart to Justin Herbert is Austin Eckler. He's projected 20.1 fantasy points, and the Giants are actually ranked 25th against the running back position. Eckler's had 7 20-point plus games and 4 weeks straight with a touchdown. He scored 41 against Pittsburgh just a couple of weeks ago, and the Giants allow 20 points per game to the running back, 7 games of 20 points or more. This matchup is just golden. And, Eckler is involved in the passing game. He's involved on the ground. So just having that big week a few weeks ago, going up against a team that is not good against running backs, it all is pointing towards Austin Eckler being probably the top running back, but within that top 3 for sure. At number 4, this one is also shaky. We don't know if he's going to play or not, but Alvin Kamara. He's projected 19 against the Jets, who are dead last against your fantasy running backs. He hasn't played since week 9, but before that, he had 6 weeks with a touchdown out of the 8 games that he played, and he had 4 20-point games, so 50% there for your boom possibility. And the Jets, they give up nearly 28 points and 2 touchdowns per game to the running back spot. So this offense needs Alvin Kamara. And when he comes back, they're going to give him a healthy workload, and that it's all a recipe for a great game from Kamara. And going up against the Jets shouldn't be too big of a problem. Then you got Najee Harris. He's projected 18.6. He's going against Minnesota, who is 18th against the running back position. Harris has 10 weeks so far with 15 points or more. So you can pretty much say that's his established floors, at least 15 points. What's his ceiling? Over 20 points. 5 games so far this season, he's got 20 points or more. A lot of those came at the beginning of the season, and he's kind of tapered down back to about 15 per week. But there is that great possibility that he could get to that 20 mark, especially because Minnesota gives up nearly 19 points to the running back position. So that's right there. That's right on that threshold of 20. And they give up 100 yards rushing, 35 receiving yards, and a touchdown to the running backs per week. Let's just look at Harris. If he goes out and he can get 100 yards on the ground, he's going to get more than, a few catches as well, and he's going to get in the end zone. All of that is going to equal, top 5 kind of performance. Then you have Tyreek Hill against the Raiders. If we're going to roll out Patrick Mahomes and he's going to boom, who's he going to boom to? Well, it's got to be Tyreek Hill. Vegas is 6th against receivers, which doesn't look like a great matchup. But Hill, he's got 20 points or more in 3 of his last 5 games. 10 targets in 4 of the last 5 games, and Vegas gives up 17.6 fantasy points to the wide receiver position. How many points did Tyreek score in their first meeting? 27.5. So it's a huge week, another big week that, again, I think Mahomes is going to go out, have that kind of a week. Tyreek Hill is going to be the beneficiary of that. The Raiders are really going to have to change up their game plan and do things to purposely stop Tyreek Hill or Travis Kelce or Patrick Mahomes to have any sort of chance in this game. So I just think this whole offense is due to have big games. Then we got Justin Jefferson. He's projected 19.4 points against Pittsburgh, who is 22nd against the receiver position. Jefferson has 2 30-point games in the last 3 weeks, 100 yards or more in 3 of the last 4, and Pittsburgh gives up 22.7 points to the receiver position. That equates to about 12 catches, 164 yards. There's a big chance Adam Thielen won't be in this week. So look at the production Jefferson has put on the board with Thielen on the field. No Thielen? Sure, KJ Osborne will step in. He'll have some work. But dang, that just is a lot of extra volume going towards Justin Jefferson. I think, he's going to have another huge week. He could even slip himself back into the Fantasy Kings next week going into the playoffs. At number 8, this one, don't quote me on it, but DK Metcalf. He's only projected 13.5, but he's going against Houston, who is 16th against the receiver position. He's had 8 targets in 3 of his last 4 games, so he is due to have a big game. 8 targets per week, going up against a Houston team that's not very good. You have to imagine they're going to be able to throw the ball better. Russ finally kind of got things going last week. So Metcalf going up against Houston, who gives up 21 points per game, 12 catches, 168 yards, and a touchdown to wide receivers. I think he finally has that week that you've been waiting for. And if you're right on the fringe, he could, he's probably part of the reason you're on the fringe, but he could get you over that hump going into next week. Then you got Mark Andrews. He's projected 14.8 going up against Cleveland, who is 16th against the tight end position. He scored 16.5 the last time they played the Browns. I believe that was in week 12. And he's got 15 points or more in 3 of the last 5 weeks. So already had a game of 15 plus against Cleveland. 3 of the last 4 or 3 of the last 5 have been 15 plus. You can't ask for much more than that. So, and look who the top 2 targets are for Baltimore. Andrews, Hollywood Brown. That's really it. Everybody else will kind of get a target here or there. But the biggest worry about this is, will the Ravens start figuring it out? Because they've had a rough few weeks where things just aren't clicking. Is Mark Andrews going to be the glue? I think so, and I think he's got a big week coming. And finishing off our boomers, we got Rob Gronkowski. He's projected 14.2 against Cincinnati, who is 2nd against the tight end position. But Gronk has had back-to-back big weeks. He had 19.5 against Indy, 21.8 against the Falcons. So back-to-back big weeks. Look at the beginning of the season when he was hitting his stride. It was the same thing. There's no reason to believe that it shouldn't continue, especially going up against Cincinnati, who surrenders a lot of points. Their defense may be okay, but they give up a lot of points. Moving on to the floppers. Big ol' fish that aren't going to do great this week. Shout out to Vic Quick there for that big ol' fish reference. But we're going to start out at the quarterback position. We got Dak Prescott. He's projected 20 going against Washington, who is 32nd. So you say, Ricky, why are we going to say Dak is going to flop? What have the Cowboys done these past few weeks? Not a whole lot. He's only averaging 16.9 since week 9, and he only has 2 games over 20 points. Washington only gave up 12.36 to Derek Carr in their last game, and Washington controls the football. So how many opportunities is Dak going to have to go out and put points on the board, along with their offense? Starting out the game, they don't start out quick. Probably a 3-and-out. Probably not a sustained drive. Then Washington controls the ball. There could be very limited amount of possessions for the Cowboys this week, which isn't going to be, a lot of points for Dak unless they get down into garbage time and he's got to throw some heaves to get them back in the game. Number 2, going with Joe Burrow. He's projected 16.8 going against San Fran, who is 10th against the quarterback position. Burrow has 4 straight weeks of under 20 points, 4 turnovers in the last 2 weeks, and only 1 game with 300 yards. So he's not on right now. In San Francisco, they give up 19.6 to the quarterback position, which seems like, hey, maybe he gets back on track and gets over 20 because the average is up there. Maybe, but I don't trust in Joe Burrow right now. It's been inconsistent the past few weeks. It's a good team that he's going against, and anytime that they've gone against an actually good team that's not struggling, they haven't been able to come out with a win. So Burrow could have a special day, but I don't see that coming. Now moving on to the running backs, Aaron Jones. He's projected 17.1 going against Chicago, who is 9th against running backs. 4 of the last 5 games that Jones has played have been less than 15 points. He only got 2.3 last week. In Chicago, they give up 17.3 to the running back position. And Jones had a good game against them the first time, scoring 21. But here's the thing. Jones hasn't been performing well. A.J. Dillon's been getting more work. Chicago's got a good run defense, so just everything is pointing to Jones scoring at the most 10 to 12 points this week. That's not going to get it done. And if he's in your running back 1 or 2 spot and you're trying to get into the playoffs, he's not the move this week. Then we got James Robinson. He's projected 14.2 going against Tennessee, who is 4th against the run. He's had 3 straight weeks of 12 points or less. So, again, not a game-winning week. 0 booms since week 5. So he's had 0 games where he's over 20, over 15 even, that since week 5. So it's just everything's gone downhill. The Jaguars offense cannot move the football. Going up against Tennessee, who's a stout defense, it's going to be tough. Now, Robinson did score 21.5 points against them the last time they played, but maybe he is like Montgomery was last week, where I didn't think he was going to get a lot, and that just ends up being where the entire offense goes to. So could happen, but it's just not looking up for James Robinson. And then finishing off the running backs, Saquon Barclays. He's projected 13.9 going up against the Chargers, who are 28th against the running backs. So again, looks like a good matchup. But Saquon, 3 straight weeks of less than 100 yards, less than 15 points, and 0 touchdowns. If you're trying to get into the fantasy playoffs, this week is a make or break week for you, and you have Saquon Barkley, you gotta steer away. No touchdowns equals less than 15 points, and you are going to need all the points you can get this week. Saquon, I just don't see it happening. If say Kamara's out, I would rather roll out Ingram than Saquon. So that's where I would be sitting with that. For your receiver position, Mike Evans, he's projected 14.5 going against Buffalo, the Billies, who are first against the wide receiver position. Now, all these stats are going to be like, yeah, start Mike Evans. What the hell are you doing? 15-plus points in 2 of the last 4 games, which that's a good average. Let's see, lost my train of thought. In Buffalo, this is the reason I'm going against Mike Evans. Not to mention Chris Godwin, who just had 17 targets last week. I mean, that's where everything's going to. Plus, you got Gronk now you're contending with. So the only chance you have is for Evans to score a touchdown. Buffalo is giving up, has 6 games where they've given up less than 10 points 10 receptions and 100 yards to the entire wide receiving core of a team. Not just one guy, the entire team. So I don't like Evans this week. If I was to go any receiving options, it would obviously be Godwin and it would be Gronkowski. Even Leonard Fournette, I think, will be more involved in the passing game than Mike Evans this week. But I was wrong about a few guys last week. He could be one of them. Then we have Amari Cooper. He's projected 14 against Washington, who is 27th against receivers. But again, it's kind of the same situation as Mike Evans. I think most of the passing offense is going to go through CeeDee Lamb. Amari will get a bit. Cedric Wilson maybe will get a bit. But it's not going to be a bulk to Amari Cooper. Cooper has 3 straight games of less than 10 points. Washington has given up less than 20 to the entire receiving core in 3 of the last 6 games that they have played. And again, the time of possession, the ball control, if Washington implements it this week, there's going to be a lot of limited opportunities for the Cowboys. And then just because I don't like him, I think Odell Beckham Jr. is going to flop this week. He's projected 13.2 against Arizona, who was 10th against receivers. If you look at last week, if he didn't have a touchdown, it was a bust week completely. He had 2 catches, 28 yards, and a touchdown. If you look on the flip side of him, Cooper Kupp had 8 for 129 and a touchdown. You heard me say it yesterday when I was talking about the Rams. They've got to start going back through Cooper Kupp because that was what helped them be successful early in the year. It's what it looks like they're starting to get back to. Not a lot of room for Odell, thank goodness. In Arizona, per game, they allow 11 catches, 137 yards, and a touchdown, which is anywhere from 20 to 21 points per game. So if we just look at last week, Odell has 3 chances to catch the football this week. It's not good odds. Then you have Dawson Knox at the tight end position, projected 10.6 against Tampa, who is 23rd against tight ends. Knox has 15 points or less in 3 of the last 4 weeks. He had 2 touchdowns in week 12 against New Orleans, which is the only reason he got over 15. And Tampa only allows 7.5 to the tight end position. They're stout. That defense is stout. Mostly against the run, not so much against the pass, but they don't give up a lot to the tight end position itself. Knox, he had that stretch of huge games, hurt his hand, came back. He hasn't really been that guy since, and there's a chance he could be, but, unless he's scoring touchdowns, he's going to be irrelevant for your fantasy team this week. And then rounding out the floppers, Cole Comet. He's projected 8.6 against Green Bay, who was 12th against tight ends. And he only has 2 weeks over 10 points. In Green Bay, they only give up 6 to tight ends per game. There's a lot of hype around Cole Comet. People have seen him make a couple plays. Congrats. That doesn't equate to anything in fantasy. Just 2 weeks over 10 points? Are you kidding me? You're not going to win games if you put a tight end in that's only scoring 8 to 9 points per week. It's just not going to happen. Don't do it this week. Green Bay's going to shut down the Bears. So just don't do it. All right, so who are we sleeping on this week? Who are some names that we're not really talking about, but they can go out and have, very complimentary weeks to the rest of your players that you hopefully have booming. Taysom Hill, starting out at quarterbacks, he's projected 21.2 against the Jets, who are 25th against quarterbacks. And get this, Taysom scored 21 points last week with 264 yards passing, 101 rushing, and 4 interceptions. He doesn't throw those 4 interceptions. Let's see, that put him at about 28 points. That would have put him into 3rd place. He would have been a top 5 quarterback last week without the 4 interceptions. So going up against the Jets, who just, that's not competition. Taysom's going to just do whatever he wants. The Jets have given up 8 multiple touchdown games. They only have 4 total interceptions on the year, and they give up about 20 to quarterbacks per week. So Taysom Hill, he's not necessarily a guy that you're like, oh, I got to go out and get him. He's going to win me my week. But he could be. And if you have a quarterback on bye, then go get him, and if your quarterback's been struggling, and this is the week, this is the final week that you can do something to make a difference to get you into the playoffs. If you're right on the fringe, go get him, because I think this week he could absolutely win you the week. And then we're going to go to Russell Wilson. He's projected 16.7. The only reason I have him here is because they finally won last week, and he's going against Houston, who's 13th against quarterbacks. 81% completion percentage last week, and he got 16.74. I think this week he can at least get himself to that 20-point range, if not more, because he's going against Houston, who's given up 5 20-point games or more this season. So I don't trust in Russ, but neither does anybody else. And he's going up against Houston. There's a good possibility he could have some sort of week there. Moving on to the running backs, Chuba Hubbard. He's projected 13.8 against Atlanta, who is 26th against the running back position. When Hubbard got his chance last time, when McCaffrey was out, he averaged 13.9. So, a safe floor, possible flex play. But Atlanta, they give up 93 rushing yards, 6 catches, and 50 yards through the air, plus a touchdown, and about 18.8 points to the running back position. It's just Chuba Hubbard. There's not Christian McCaffrey back there to, steal any of the thunder. So give that stat line to Chuba. You're going to have a huge, gigantic week. And, there's a possibility. I think that could happen. It's going to be a tight game against Atlanta, who it was already a tight game once. We're going to have to see. And, if you look back when they played Atlanta the first time in Week 8, Chuba had 21 points. So, again, just another guy that you can put into your lineup who possibly can push you over the edge next week or this week. And then Nick Chubb. Just looking at his projection, he's getting slept on, and for good reason, but he's still Nick Chubb, and there's still that possibility that he could have a big game. He's projected 13.8 against Baltimore, who is 10th. He only had 5.9 points against them in Week 12, but in the 2 weeks after that, 137 rushing yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 catches for 30.3, and then 130 rushing yards, 2 catches for 24.4 fantasy points. So, sure, he had that off week. But those other 2 games were great. Baltimore is struggling. So is Cleveland, but they're going to have they're going to have to lean on both those running backs. And I think if they do, if they pound the ground and let Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb take over this game, not only can they win, but it'll be a big week for both those running backs. And then I'm going to throw Javonte Williams in here. We're all still sleeping on him. You've all been sleeping on him. I am not. I knew he was going to have a week like he has had, and it has been 2 back-to-back 20-point games for him. He's projected 13.4, and he's going against Detroit, who is 30th against the running back. And they give up an average of 107 on the ground, a touchdown, 4 catches, and 34 yards, about 22 points per game to the running back position. Sure, Melvin Gordon may be back this week, but if he's going to be back at all, it's going to be a limited capacity. He's not going to be, full go. And if they do put him in full go, he's going to probably get hurt. So, Javonte still has a good chance of putting up another 20-point week against Detroit, who's just not good. Sure, they won last week. They won against Minnesota. And Minnesota just knows how to lose games. So I think Javonte, he's in for another big week. Wide receiver position. If you're still sleeping on him after the few weeks he's had, you're crazy. But T. Higgins, he's projected 14.6 going up against San Francisco, who is 12th against receivers. And again, Higgins, back-to-back 20-point-plus games. 2 weeks ago, 6 catches, 114 and a touchdown, 23 points. And then last week, 9 for 138, a touchdown, 28.8. San Francisco, they give up about 20.33. So we put Joe Burrow into the flops. That doesn't mean T. Higgins is going to flop. I think, it's a game where it could be a shootout. They could be throwing the ball a lot. Burrow could, get over his 20, but T. Higgins, I think, 14 targets. 14 targets means you are in. They want to get you the ball. So I think that's got to continue this week. Sure, Jamar Chase is still a part of the offense. He's going to get his. But T. Higgins, if he can even get 7, 8, 9 targets, he could turn that into something good. Hunter Renfro is next up. He's projected 14.2 against Kansas City, who is 7th against the receiver position. And he's had 9 targets or more in 4 games since the bye that they had. It's been 9 targets, 9 targets, 9 targets, 10 targets, and 4 17-plus point games. He had a 17-point game, another 17-point game, a 21-point game, and a 19-point game. So he's the guy that I've had to implement into my roster to close out the year. And he's a good piece. He always gets a lot of targets. He's always anywhere from 7 to 9, and, that's a decent amount. He's starting to finally put points on the board for you with those targets. And last game against Kansas City, he had 9 targets, 7 receptions, 46 yards, and a touchdown. So he had a good game against them last time. I imagine they're going to have to throw the ball more this time than they did last time, which is going to mean he's got to get a few more targets at least. Elijah Moore, the only reason you'd be sleeping on him, well, it's because they're going against New Orleans, and you would expect this just isn't a good game for the Jets. But Elijah Moore, he's projected 14.2. He's going against New Orleans, who is 30th against receivers, and he's had 3 weeks of 20 points or more since the bye. And he had 20.6 last week. 6 touchdowns since the bye. In New Orleans, they give up 24 points per game, 13 catches, 182 through the air, and a touchdown. Think of the Jets. They're throwing the ball. Who are they throwing to? Possibly Jamison Crowder and Elijah Moore. If I said Mitchell earlier, I did mean Moore. Elijah Moore. But he's got to be that main target. And he's been putting a lot together and looking really good. So he's a guy that, you may not think about putting him in your lineup. But if he's out there, he's on your bench. If you have a guy like Amari Cooper, I would much rather play Elijah Moore this week. And then to cap off the sleepers, we have Ricky Seals-Jones at the tight end position. He's projected 8.3 against Dallas, who is 22nd. He's had 32 targets when Logan Thomas was out. In Carolina, they've given up only 2 games over 10 points, so it's going to be tough. But if Logan Thomas isn't there and Dallas I don't understand what it is I just put right here. But either way, Dallas, if they don't, maintain possessions. Washington's trying to maintain possession of the ball. It could just be, quite a few targets for Ricky Seals-Jones, possibly a red zone target for a touchdown, and that could be enough to put you over this week. And then Zach Ertz, he's only projected 7.9, which is preposterous. I don't know why. Going up against the Rams, who are 19th against the tight end position. Ertz, since joining Arizona, has 2 15-point games. In the Rams, they gave up 5 for 53 and 7.3 to the tight end position so far this year. So just look at Hurts. Since going to Arizona, he's just looked really, really good. He had the week with, 2 touchdowns? He had another week with a long touchdown. So, I mean, this is a game that probably going to have to be a shootout because Arizona scores a lot of points. The Rams are going to have to keep up. So, Ertz could get quite a few targets and could, not a lot of people are thinking about him. And he could be one of those top guys this coming week. Now let's finish off with either or. So would I rather play Ricky Seals-Jones against Dallas or Tyler Conklin against Pittsburgh? I just talked about Jones and the possibilities that could be there. But there's also opportunity for Conklin. Again, like Justin Jefferson is going to benefit from Adam Thielen being out. So is Tyler Conklin. And those red zone targets that normally go to Thielen, those are going to have to go somewhere. And Tyler Conklin, he could just have 2 catches, but it could be 2 touchdowns, which is more valuable than just, 4 catches for 40 yards. So I'm going to go with Conklin instead of Seals-Jones there. There's that possibility for touchdowns. Now, Taylor Heineke or Derek Carr. Heineke's going against Dallas. Carr's going against Kansas City. It's comparable because Derek Carr may not have all that great of a game against Kansas City, but Taylor Heineke might not, have to throw the ball all that much against Dallas when all they're trying to do is control the clock. So I think Heineke is who I would go with. There's less chance, honestly, of him turning the ball over than there is of Derek Carr turning the ball over. So I just think that is the little bit of a deciding factor where I would go Heineke over Carr. This one, 2 teammates, Chase Edmonds or James Conner. Chase Edmonds may be back this week, which he's now projected higher than James Conner. But would you still take Edmonds over Conner at this point? I don't care what capacity that Edmonds comes back in. James Conner is touchdown man. And he's who they go to when they need a big play from the running back position. So I would still go Conner here, regardless of if Edmonds is healthy. Conner, even when Edmonds was healthy, was still more productive than Chase was. So I would go with James Conner there. At the wide receiver position, Darnell Mooney or Chase Claypool. This one's kind of tough. Pittsburgh's offense, I don't know how much I trust them. Claypool is in contention with Deontay Johnson for targets. And if Johnson's getting 14 targets, there's not a lot to go around for Claypool. And he would almost have to be what you would depend on like you will with Tyler Conklin. For Mooney, I think they're going to be down against Green Bay. And Mooney's already turned into the top target over the past, 4 or 5 weeks. So I would take Mooney there. There's a lot more opportunity. They're in a game where they are going to have to throw the football. So he's got to be the better bet than Chase Claypool. But that is it today, everybody, for the fantasy show. Last actual regular season fantasy show. Next week will be the playoffs. So we'll have to dive into that head first. Hopefully, you'll still be tuning in because you'll still be in the fantasy playoffs. Join tomorrow, Dylan Corbett and I going over the betting lines and all of that in the Lucky Bets podcast. I'm not going to make any promises, but I will try to actually be up this week for it. I slept through alarms last week, so nothing on Dylan. This is all on me. But we will try to get you that coming up tomorrow. So, for the fantasy show, for the Lucky Shots podcast, I am Mickey Larson. See you tomorrow.